Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I want to make sure you are all on the same page, so everybody should have these notes in front of them. If you're distance learning, make sure that you have already gone into Teams. Pause this video if you haven't. Go into Teams and Class Notebook and make sure you click on Class Notes and the Additive Inverse Notes. Just a note, I did notice in the last video some of the tapping gets very loud, so I'll try to be more mindful of that in this video. But let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk today about additive inverse. We're also going to talk a little bit about absolute value. Sometimes while I'm talking, I might doodle a little bit. If you want to draw on your notes, color in your notes, that's fine. Just make sure you're keeping up with what we put into the blanks. So there are blanks in your document for you to type in or to write in. And if you want to use the draw, you may just know that to get out of the draw, all you have to do is click to the left where it has that little arrow, little pointer with the A and the typing mechanism to get back into typing, okay? So additive inverse is a value, and I do not care for this pen, so let me fix it before we get really going. Make sure. A value that when added to a second value will always result in a sum of 0. And before we get too far into that, I want to do a quick refresher on how to add and subtract on the number line. Now you should remember from, I'm going to use a different pen. This is something you do not have to draw. So this is not going into any of your blanks. This is just me drawing to explain a little bit. So you can take a little bit of a break. I want to remind you of how we add and subtract on a number line. So back when you were younger, you may have had a very simple problem like 1 plus 3. And on the number line, what that means is you're always going to start at 0. And then your first number is going to dictate what you do. So this first one, 1, we're going to start at 0, and then we're going to go up 1. Okay? Your second number will dictate your second step, so it's plus 3. That means we're going to go up 3 more. 1, 2, 3. So plus 3. And that will end us up at 4, which means your answer is 4. You have a sum of 4. This functions the same with subtraction. You just work in the other way. So for example, if you had, I'm going to go even a little bit smaller. If you had 4 and you want to subtract 2, you would start with this first number. You'd start at 0 and you would go up 1, 2, 3, 4. And the second number would dictate that you go down 2. So you would go 1, 2. And that would end you up at an answer of 2. So that's just a quick refresher on how we use the number line. And we're going to tie that into additive inverse by showing what that means with integers, because we are working with integers now. So a numeric example of that might be, I'm going to erase this stuff too. Again, that's not stuff you have to draw. That's just my doodles. Okay. So a numeric example of an additive inverse might be, we'll stick with 4. The additive inverse of 4 is negative 4. What that means is 4 and negative 4 together should equal 0. And we can see that on the number line by starting at 0 and going up 4. So if we go up 4, we end up at the 4. The additive inverse means we want to get a sum of 0. We want to get back to 0. So what do we have to add to 4 to get back to 0? Well, a negative 4 should take us the other direction. And I'm going to use a different color just so it's not mixing together too much. So going from 4 back down to 0, we would need to go back down 4 spots to end up at 0. Again, this stuff is doodles. You do not have to copy that. But that shows us that an additive inverse is always any number you go that you would add to the first number to get back to 0. I don't think I said that very well. Let me try again. The additive inverse of any number is whatever it takes to get back to 0. So another example of that is, let's say we're at -2. So our first number is -2. What would it take to get back to 0? What would we need to get back to 0? Not past 0, back to 0. So I'm going to use a different color so it doesn't blend. If I'm at -2 and I want to get back to 0, I have to go up 2. So the additive inverse of -2 is +2. That means basically that any number, so algebraically we could represent any number by writing a variable. So we could say any number like A. If we travel up the number line to +A, wherever that is, the number that will get us back to 0 is the opposite of that, so -A. Okay? And a visual example of that, we're going to type out here. So this is where you are back with me, I hope, typing into the boxes, and I'm going to use blue. In your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think this is box 8. Go ahead and write out -3 is the additive inverse of +3, or 3, and vice versa. Vice versa means the other way around works too. So 3 is the additive inverse of -3, and -3 is the additive inverse of +3. And so we're going to draw some dots, and this is where you want to use your draw tool. Within Teams, if you are using it, if you are in person, you can use regular crayons, and then you're going to have to click back to the text so that we can start filling these in. So that's additive inverse. It's pretty simple and straightforward. It's whatever it takes to get back to 0. So if you're at +5 down here and you're trying to get back to 0, you're going to have to jump down 5 spots. So you're going to have to go -5 to get to 0. Okay? And this will help us when we begin to add and subtract integers. It'll help us solve those problems, and we'll see how that works a little bit in the future. So let's talk about real-life examples. A real-life example might be someone gives you $4. Oops. Someone might give you $4 and then take $4 away. So if I gave you $4 and I took $4 away, you would end up with no money. Another example is Rachel may earn, and then make sure you're following along with me and typing these things in. Rachel might earn $25 babysitting, but if she goes and spends that $25 at the store, then she no longer has any money. And within football, Quentin may have gotten sacked for a loss of 5 yards, but then he gains 5 yards to make up for that. The temperature might increase 12 degrees, and we're going to put our little degree symbol in there. If you can't type that 12, the degrees in, that's okay. So if it increases 12 degrees in the morning, to come back down, we're going to have to go down 12 degrees to make that a no change. So that is additive inverse. You're going to have an IXL to work on after that, but we're going to go ahead and fill in the rest of these notes because they are helpful for absolute value as well. So if you remember from yesterday, I'm going to pick a new color because I like colors. You do not have to be doing this part. Absolute value is the distance of a number from 0. Okay. And we remember that distance is always positive. Since absolute value represents a distance, it should never be negative, because you wouldn't say, sorry about that, you wouldn't say that you went -5 miles, so you would never have negative absolute value because it is a distance. So it should never be a negative value. And then 2 vertical straight lines. This is again a review of yesterday, are used to represent absolute value. For example, the absolute value of -10 or the absolute value of 24. And I wrote that really small, so let me see if I can fix that real quick. Okay. And the absolute value of -30, so a numerical example, the absolute value of -30 is 30. And the absolute value of -b, or any number, the absolute value of any number is the positive version of that number. And if we wanted to show that visually, we may show it on a number line. The absolute value of -2 is however many jumps it takes to get to 0. So this is 2 spaces. So the absolute value of -2 equals 2. Okay, and into that we are going to get into some real life examples. So Lisa has a balance of -$35. And Samantha has a balance of -$32. Use this information to answer the following. Which person has a greater debt? Who is further in debt? Give me a minute to think about that. Lisa is further in debt. Lisa owes $35, and she owes more money than Samantha, so that means that she has a greater debt. Okay. And which person has the greater absolute value? Well, we know the absolute value of -35 is 35. And the absolute value of -32 is 32. And this is Lisa, and this is Samantha. So it looks like Lisa has the greater absolute value. Okay. And the last one is, which one has a greater account balance? So who has more money? Well, this is where we get a little bit tricky. We talked about this in the last video. Remember that negative numbers are kind of the opposite of positive numbers. So the further you move down, the number line, the smaller the number gets. Or the further you move to the left, the smaller the number gets. So what that means is, as we're counting out to the number line, we're going to get to -32, then we're going to get -33, -34, and -35. So -35 is further to the left than -32, which means -32 is the bigger number. That means Samantha has the greater account balance. She technically has more money. Okay, those are our notes for additive inverse.